This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Melanie Goodwin. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Now, I want to let people know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You can see that little icon up there that says listen on Newsly. So, Phantom Electric Ghost is a featured podcast on that platform. If you use coupon code GHOST, get 1 month free premium subscription. And this podcast will be on Newsly later tonight as an audio version, because that's what they do. They convert video to audio. So, thank you again for being on the podcast. And let people know that we're actually at episode 927 of the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. And we've been around since 2016, and that's tracking on Apple Podcast with that number. Is one of the first platforms we were ever on. And then additionally, we've got your link up there. And for those of you on the audio podcast, we've got a link that says resurrectedroadkill.com. For those of you who are listening on audio, we want to be able to tell you and that's resurrectedroadkill.com. And then what we're going to talk about in this podcast are the growth stages of an artist or a creative entrepreneur. So with that, I don't know how you want to start with that. Or maybe you talk about what people can get to on that website, just to kind of let people know what they do when they get there on your website.
Sure. Yeah, that is a good starting point. That Resurrected Roadkill is a memoir, and what it's kind of got. There was an argument that there are two books within one book. The first act or the first part is kind of an escape from a super toxic, abusive relationship. And then the second and third parts are the rebuilding of my life. And what that ended up being was the story arc of coming out of being what Julia Cameron would call I can't think of her phrase. My phrase is sort of a wannabe artist. Someone who is dreaming but not taking action, that kind of scenario, whether it's a dream for a business or a dream for a creative career of some kind. Oh, she would call it shadow artistry. Someone who might even believe that they're completely capable, but they're still not doing anything about it. So obviously there's some internal constraints and there's some chaos going on that's sort of self-canceling. So that's what the book covers. It covers a trauma-bonded relationship, relational abuse, getting out, and then the career recovery.
Wow, and that's cool.
Yeah. It's just what I found out when I first I left that relationship and I observed what is called the no contact rules. When there's a trauma bond, there's kind of 3 tiers. I don't know how much you're in the details, but there's 3 tiers. If you can preserve the relationship and shift it, it's probably not gone that far south. Some people have to have minimal contact because maybe they have small children and they're doing joint custody or things like that. But when it's really severe and serious and has an element of danger, if you don't have children involved, they recommend a no contact form of separation. And that's what I did. And it's kind of a harrowing book start. It feels a little bit like a thriller in a way. And I did that on purpose because I wrote it in a way that makes it a very compelling read. People want the next chapter kind of thing. But I also I laced in a lot of trauma science so that people will get a good orientation to trauma and recovery and what kind of treatments and treatment modalities are effective and which ones are not, and to try to help people understand what their options are. And then we got to actually being an artist. So you want to jump in there? Does that kind of help frame it a little bit?
Yeah, well, we kind of cover all bases with our podcast. We initially started as being a podcast about musicians, and then the last 2 years we've had therapists and domestic violence therapists, and life coaches, and all kinds of people who are diving into what you just talked about. We had, a couple of days ago, we had people that were diving into, you know, situations that are very much similar to what you just discussed. But
Yep.
we've always tried to thread it with the creativity of, like, within therapy, people do art therapy, or they do journaling, or they start finding out, like, is that inner child, did you want to be an author? Did you want to be a photographer? Did you want to be a painter, but then people told you weren't good enough, or
You
people told
can't.
you that that's silly. And then later, when you start to recover, you realize that, yeah, why not follow what you really wanted to do? And so that's a lot of the creative spark that we talk to with artists, is their art is very cathartic. When you talk to singer-songwriters, almost, I've talked to over 300, almost every single one of them will tell you that what they're doing is very cathartic, and they would do it whether they made money or not, because it
Right.
actually is their therapy for their own situation.
Yep. Yeah. And I'm here to say again, I'm another one. Um, yeah, so,
Mm, yeah,
the
it's common.
the yeah, I know it is. In fact, in the early part of what I have written, I kind of go into a chapter on how we understand the imagination or creativity, and we are frequently told that um, the imagination is the part of our brains where we kind of make things up. And of course, that's not incorrect, but I personally feel like it's vastly missing something. And the something that's missing from that
Mhm.
is that I understand creativity and imagination as a two-direction gateway. And when we talk to artists, I mean, most people feel like, "Man, when I'm in the zone, I'm smarter than I normally am. I get brilliant ideas, and I don't think they're coming from me," right? Like, when, if
Yeah,
you're
the
improving
muse.
or
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, the muse. Yeah, the Greeks had a great framework for understanding. They were trying to tap into something that's beyond, and, so since the imagination plays such an important role in recovery, but you have to understand that you're not making stuff up. Like, if you're journaling and you hit on a massive revelation, you can't talk yourself out of it and get benefit from it, right? You can't go, "Oh, well, I just made that up. That's
mhm.
probably not real." So you have to actually
Yeah,
trust
definitely.
this imaging capacity. Like, if you saw a vision in your mind's eye, you have to trust that you're hearing something super valuable.
I totally get that, because I'm a sound designer. You see all my
Uh-huh.
synthesizers behind me, but,
I do.
and I'm a keyboardist, I'm a producer, and I like to think of, like, George Martin from the Beatles.
Oh,
He
yeah,
was asked
love
about, like,
George
"How did
Martin.
you get the Sergeant Pepper's," right? And he said, "Well,
Right.
it's like Monet, it's a sound painting." There's actually a documentary where he starts talking about how what they did was a sound painting, and
I love it.
that kind of set up the whole record industry to think of music not as just singles, but as, like, concepts and albums and art that was connected, and you actually could do, what you used to end up having, the Pink Floyds of the world and the Yeses and the Jazz. You start having these bands that actually realize that the music could be very cinematic. It could be like art,
Totally.
like rock, or like rock opera. So you could go into these zones where it means a lot, and it is multi-directional, where is
Oh,
that
yeah.
guy talking about, you know, about himself, or is he projecting, like a Bruce Springsteen, he creates these characters.
Yeah,
Pete
yeah.
Townsend, and with Tommy, he created characters. Is
I
that
was just
him?
thinking of
Part of it's
Tommy.
him, and part of it
Yeah.
is the character. Yeah, as
Mhm.
part of the character is him, part of it's another character that he wrote. And that's, it's kind of multi-directional. As an artist, you take all your influences, take all your training, and then you feel the universe. Right, so you feel, so, like, I could be channeling Coltrane, or I could be channeling, like, like a blues guy like Lead Belly or Robert Johnson, or I could be channeling, something I just saw on a news show, like a statement somebody said or a newspaper article, and it will just creep into my work. And it's something
Right.
that's inside, my microcosm and my macrocosm. So I feel, yeah, a lot of artists, if you talk to them, they totally agree. They're very
Mhm.
multi-directional.
Oh, yeah.
Things are coming from
Yeah.
inside and outside, and
Yeah.
it's all layered.
Yeah, it's layered and it's a two-way communication. It's dialogue with something beyond, and that's what I think is maybe the most exciting thing about being an artist. But if you apply that same capacity to recovery, you've got an arsenal of tools now that are far better because when it comes to a traumatic history, it'll rewrite the brain. It'll literally regroove the brain if you're using your imagination to kind of reframe stories or, um, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Bissell van der Kolk, but he has people do what's called drama therapy, where they're in a small
Mm,
group of people they know, and they get to say, you pretend you're my mother, you're my dad, and
mm,
whoever it is that they have something to work through with, they instead of going out to the actual relationships that are frequently fraught and not functioning all that well, they get to work in this group and say what the mother is going to do and say. So they get to act out what they needed
oh, wow.
instead of what they got in reality, but the brain is
Mm,
literally experiencing it without any distinction between reality or drama,
and yeah,
and so it regrooves. It's just, so I get pretty excited. I love the imagination and creativity because it's kind of saved my life. So that would be a great reason all by itself. But for what it can do for all of us, it is astounding, and it's cool that a lot of the, trauma-informed therapists are turning more toward that than, like, traditional talk therapy, which, statistically has not been the best at,
it's
helping people
successful.
resolve.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The
So
brain
and
is
by the
very
way
interesting because yeah, go ahead. But I mean,
no,
to say
well
the brain is really interesting because, like, when you speak something out, like, when you actually vocalize instead of keeping it inside, right? When you actually say what you're feeling and you talk to somebody, you start to make those words real when you talk them. And so it makes
mhm.
sense that if you act something out, that your brain's gonna actually, build that out in a way that if you just kept it inside or don't have that back and forth, that it becomes a real memory gets put into your brain. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really how I mean, however you're comfortable, how God designed the universe or how the universe works or, we are first we have the thought, and then if we know how to take a spark and do the process of creating, we know that means getting something on paper or on digital audio or MIDI or, whatever the format is, that is the process of manifesting something. But creation has to start with the
Mhm.
spark and then the ability to like get it on canvas. What I
Yeah.
was going to say
Well, a lot of
before
people,
was, yeah,
yeah,
go ahead. This is a fun
they
conversation. You
don't.
go ahead.
Well, they kind of like don't respect art because you can see like in schools it's like get rid of the art program, get rid of the music program, and just stay with the sports and the science and the math, and they don't understand that human beings are very creative, right? No, even if
Yes.
you don't think you're creative, you're very
Yes.
creative in all the things you do. You create even if you don't think you do, and so yeah, like trying to get people to feel like they always want to compare themselves. Well, I'm not Picasso. Well, I'm not Dylan. Well, I'm not John Lennon. Yeah, of course you're not. But you have individually, everybody has their own like spark of creativity, and it's valid and it's beautiful, and you should put it out. And you shouldn't just think, well, if I can't be but John Lennon, then I shouldn't do it. But that's not the
Yeah.
case.
Yeah. Well, I have a phrase that I think I coined, and I what I say is imagination is the lost twin of reason. And what I mean when I say that is that we go to school, and the school system puts, some value on math and science, and the ability to reason, like the ability to, add figures and come up with the right math answer. But it devalued something more mysterious, it's true, and less measurable, and that is imagination. But the reason I say it's the lost twin is because when we go through life, the only thing that makes our life meaningful is the ability to interpret that, and that takes imagination. That takes something that's not on
Mhm.
this side of reason. And artists are doing that all the time, and, some people would argue that artists are less adjusted, but I think artists are actually far more self-aware and adjusted than some of these people that only believe in facts, figures, and if you can stick it in a tray and measure the weight, you know? So it
Yeah.
is, to me,
I
it's the
run into
lost
yeah.
twin. Go ahead.
Well, I've run into a lot of people. I'm in design. I did software design. And
Okay,
the
cool.
thing about software, it's like art and science. Like when
Yeah.
we do software, we do art and science, and we actually get to see what geometry and physics and
Mhm.
algebra and calculus does, because you can then you'll actually see screens and functions and things that do that. It's like, oh, okay, that's what that algebra actually does. That's what that
Uh-huh.
geometry actually does. And so as a musician, also, as a keyboardist, it's like a math to music. There's a
Mhm.
logic in the timing. There's a lot, as
Yeah.
a synthesis, we deal with sound waves. I spend all this time taking triangle waves, sine waves, cosine waves, ramp waves, pulse waves, and turning them into things through a theory called subtractive synthesis. It's
Okay.
science, but it's art.
Uh-huh.
So
Yes.
taking sound waves and turning them into bells, or turn them into basses, or turn them into like piano-like structures or things you never heard.
Right.
And so the
Right.
idea that you can take math and you can take art, it's always been there. The fact that there's some, but there's emotion and heart and soul that is not in the science. That's what the human factor adds, and that's what people sometimes don't respect or don't understand or
Right.
don't appreciate.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's well said, and, so that is definitely what I'm all about, is either using that imaging or that imaginative capacity that we have, either first for recovery, because I mean, in my case, there was no progress without some steps in recovery. And if you want, I can go over the basic stages there. And then, but for an artist or for someone with a entrepreneurial vision or dream, any visionary person, there are additional steps beyond that. You want to go there?
You can start however you want to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we kind of, obviously, we're both excited about it. We think we kind of set it up, but basically, one of the first things I want to say is when it comes to recovery, or artistry, it's gonna start or come down to or come back to belief. Because I can tell you, like when I first walked into a codependence group, um, I I wept when I heard the 12 promises, and they were simple things like, um, have the right to be in an environment where I'm loved and appreciated, or I will have good relationship. I mean, really simple things, and yet the hearing of it,
Mhm.
um, and my emotional reaction revealed that, wow, I have not been experiencing things for so long that I forgot to even hope for those, right? And so the first thing that got
Mm.
challenged was my belief. Like, can my life be beautiful? Can it happen? And so it That's one of the foundational things, but it's not like we go to that as step 1 and finish step 1 and then we never go back. It doesn't work like that. What I also noticed, and they're very similar, is that I think life has to be sort of deconstructed if you've been in a super abusive pattern or a toxic pattern. And in my life, it had to do with self-acceptance, and I didn't even realize that I was pretty self-loathing, so I had to work through that. And then another one that Bissell van der Kolk talks about is agency. And agency, I would define
Mm.
agency as, um, r maybe I can define it better with storytelling, but imagine if a child grows up in the sex slave trade, right? Their whole existence is controlled for them in a way that that young brain is never gonna have any reason to realize or figure out that their life is their own, right? And so even
Mhm.
if they get
Yeah, very
free,
top down.
yeah, yeah, so even if they get freed, one of the most, essential, um, needs they're gonna have is to have the realization that my life is my own. I need to take ownership of it. I can shape it. If I'm in situations I don't like, I'm the one who can make the difference. And that's called agency, just having that awareness. It's a normal thing that develops for everybody as long as their childhood is not too traumatic. But for kids with a
Yeah.
traumatic childhood, that doesn't grow up like the legs and the body size does. It just doesn't develop properly. So,
Yeah, a lot
I
of
was
people can end up in that kind of very authoritarian type of
mhm,
top-down structure, whether they were in
mhm,
slavery or sex worker. If you were in a situation where you had a narcissistic parent that was
right.
controlling you and basically saying you're never gonna amount to anything, then you have
Mhm,
a belief that's not true. That's not a truth, but that narcissist embeds you with that and basically says, "You're never gonna measure up to me, and I'm the best, and you can never be me. You're never gonna be an individual. You're gonna be like you can't ever get that individuality that you need to have to develop. Like if you're always you end up seeking out another narcissist. What I've found is
yeah,
people end up getting into a pattern where they just keep on replacing that narcissist with another one, and another one until they actually get rid of that belief that they're not good or they're never going
right,
to measure up. And so they just keep
exactly.
on replacing that person with the same person.
Totally. Yeah, that's actually a little bit what my story is. I mean, I shouldn't say a little bit maybe, but I had a birth trauma, just real fast. I had a birth trauma, on the heels of when I recovered from the disease. I had a staph infection, and so that meant for every hour, like for the first few weeks, it's not clear to me how many weeks, um, but I had to get lanced hourly. And so for maybe as much as a month or
Mm,
2 of my very first experience on earth was lancing, and when the nurses couldn't do it, my mom was trained to do it, and so I grew up with a extremely distrustful relationship of mom and parents. So I was rather defiant as a kid because if people got in my face or took me by the shoulders and tried to shake me, which, I grew up in the 1960s, and people were just really treating their children differently then, right? So I had people in my face and trying to get me to behave right
yeah, yeah.
because my behavior was labeled as I was labeled as a defiant child. And so I was in trouble a lot, and nobody
Mm,
was thinking this is a traumatized person. Let's try to bring some trauma informed care here, because they just frightened me. And so what I did was I fought, I kicked, and I screamed, and I bit my babysitters and my parents. And So the identity that formed, and that's another thing on both lists, the recovery list and the growth stages of an artist or a business person, is identity. So I'm gonna come back to that a little bit later. But my first identity that was formed in my family of origin because of this story, this origin story, was, you know, um, rejected, not trustworthy, unlikable, trouble, and just kind of worthless, like would be. In fact, I had a suicidal moment that was changed radically by a vision on the heels of it. So I'm really grateful for that. But my suicidal thought was everyone in my family would be happier if I was just dead. And I mean, I was 11, so it's not
Yeah,
like I
yeah,
thought about killing myself. I don't mean that. I just mean my thought
mhm.
process led me to think
Your process was
everyone
happening. Yeah.
yeah, everyone would be happy if I was just dead. And so it was really like the ultimate of self-cancellation, right? And
Mhm,
so that was my mindset until it got challenged, and then I married, 3 times. I married everybody I got. I had a conservative upbringing, so I married everybody I got serious with, and the first 2 marriages lasted less than 4 years because I was quickly out of there, but on the 3rd time around, I thought, "This problem must be mine, and so I'm gonna stick it out. I can't bail again." But I was with someone worse the 3rd time than the 1st and the 2nd
mm,
man. And
me too.
what you just said, I did. I married sort of the same person 3 times. They were not the same man. I just mean the
Mm,
dynamics were playing
personality-wise.
out, yeah, the dynamics were the same, each time. And so finally, when I got out of my 24-year marriage, um, it that's when I call it my gut to the studs remodel. Like, if you know any
Mhm.
contractors, like when you go in and you
Yeah,
just gut,
got
that's
the
what
whole
my
thing
life
out,
was. Yeah, my life was a gut job. And, because there was very little structure that I trusted at the time. And then,
yeah.
of course,
You
when you
need
build back.
a foundational shift.
Yeah, I need a major
Yeah.
shift. I needed 100 and shifts, you know what I mean? So yeah, you're absolutely right. Until I deconstructed the trauma origin and did a lot of work, I was gonna always marry narcissistic people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it seems to be the common thread that, like, what that, I've been doing this maybe only for 2 years, getting into this zone of dealing with these type of issues, and the common thread I
right.
keep on hearing as a podcast host is narcissism, like inner child, people being, wounded because of the, like, beliefs that aren't truths. Like, the idea
Exactly.
that you're not good enough, that you're never gonna be good enough, that, you don't "I wish you weren't born," the kind of vibe
Yeah. Or
that
you're just
some
a pain in the
narcissistic
butt.
people yeah, they put on their kids, they don't realize how much damage they're doing, right?
Right,
So,
right.
whether it's a grandparent or their uncle or their aunt or whatever, somebody important in your early development gets these beliefs in your head and you think they're truths, and then you get stuck in this
Mhm.
whole cycle until you realize you have a right to be happy. You have a right to not be repeating something like you're in this codependency, and you don't need to be there. That you can be
Right,
happy. Everybody has a right to be happy. It's not like your duty to suffer through everything. And a
right.
lot of people are kind of taught with their systems that it's actually okay to suffer through. It's not okay to challenge why you're suffering through it. It's like just deal with it. And people, have this kind of stoicism. It's like, oh, I'm just supposed to deal with it. Like, no. It seems like maybe you are supposed to deal with it in a different way.
Yeah, no joke, right? Yeah, and for me, because I was a believer, I mean, and when I say that, I mean a Christian. I wanna be super careful about how I say this because I'm really glad to be a Christian. I'm grateful to God, but there was some teachings, and I kinda make a distinction when call that churchianity. There was some teachings that
Mhm.
really solidified my sense of I don't have the freedom to leave, right? Because there wasn't any adultery, and some Christian churches say
Yeah.
that the New Testament
You
says
can't.
without adultery you can never leave. And, I
Mhm.
don't believe that's what the whole Bible says, and that's a whole other discussion. But I did actually go into that in the book because I had to work through, well, what does the scripture say? Because I'm trying
Mhm.
to, follow this book, right? So what's in there? So so
Everything can be
so
interpreted. That's the problem. Is like it depends on like your spiritual guidance could have their own objective. And if they happen to be certain types of men, they could say, "No, there's no other interpretation than what the way I say it." And
oh,
then
and I
you could read
believe
somebody else's. And so the thing is, like, that's where your individualism is. Like, you have a right to read it and interpret it, and then find
mhm.
people who believe maybe what you believe, and it's not just one interpretation; it's multiple interpretations of things. And some people want you to only have one way. But usually you gotta questions like, why do they want that one way? You know?
Yeah, yeah, no joke. Well, I think historically that I don't know, I don't think anyone can doubt that there's been a lot of harm because when the church was saying, "Yeah, maybe he's sexually abusing your children, or maybe he's, beating you half across the house, on a regular basis, but if there's not adultery, you can't leave." And so, I mean,
Yeah,
things
that doesn't
got
seem
really messed up.
respectful.
Yeah,
That's not very
not at all.
respectful of the other half of humanity. Like, when you have a very top-down, kinda male-centered
Oh,
universe,
yeah.
that somehow
Yeah.
that person is closer to God, and they're kinda like they're dictating like the Bible's dictating, and then this other person who happens to be, a woman, they can't challenge it.
Or a child.
And when you
Yeah.
put somebody in a situation where you can't challenge, like, something that's doing harm, and
Mhm.
then you have to start to, like, is that actually valid? Right? You have to start to look at it, and a lot of times people get, they wanna be a good person, they wanna follow their spiritual guidance. There's multiple
Right.
religions that can get people into the same issue. And
Right.
the issue then is like, okay, why is that happening? It's like I was a sociologist, and I took
Mhm.
sociology, and it's like the whole idea of the macrocosm and then the
Yeah.
microcosm. So
Mhm.
you have these macrocosms systems that can subject people to certain behaviors because certain, human traits to try to run into something that's like top down, bottom up, individualism versus not individualism, more authoritarian, whatever. You have these different structures, and people don't realize that sometimes your religion can fall into these like political structures
Oh,
that
no joke.
may
Yeah.
not be valid for human rights. So it's like okay, so then you have to come to that decision when you're ready, or when you open your mind to be able to say, hey, I got a right to actually be a human being, and as a human being I have a right to have certain freedom, regardless of whatever this
Yes.
book says.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what happened for my thought process was I started to think, well, first of all, going back to what you said, I think there, that interpretation of the New Testament came about in a context when women they weren't considered full human beings, they were property, right? They were property. At the time that King James was doing the
Mhm.
translation of the Bible into English, um, women were property, and so the mindset that worked with English translations, seeing it through this lens of, well, women are just our property, didn't take into account all of the provisions from the Old Testament that gave a person, a woman, or a man, either one, the right to say, if I am not cared for, if there are deficiencies in how I'm cared for,
Mhm.
or in my life with this, then the marital covenant is broken already. And by leaving, all I'm doing is acknowledging reality. I'm not the marriage breaker,
Yeah.
you know, the one who is abusive is. And but what my thought process was that led me to even do the research was either I knew God well enough to know God is good and kind, and like everything good in my life is from God. And yet, if what they were telling me was true, then I thought God is incredibly cruel. And
Yeah,
so it
it
was
doesn't
this
match. It doesn't match, does
and
it?
no, not at all. So I had this cognitive dissonance to sort out, right? And it's like, okay, do I believe he's good or do I believe God is cruel? And since I absolutely would never accept that God was cruel, I had to dig deeper. And that's when I discovered there's all kinds of provisions for doing what I did. And
Yeah.
I would to kind of sum all that up. I'm grateful for my faith, but I was harmed by churchianity. What I call churchianity was harmful for me.
Yeah, I can say if you think about the whole, being an African American, we can find the same kind of things. We can
Yeah,
find,
I'm sure
there are passages that were used, where the children
to
of
elevate
Cain,
white.
they,
Yeah,
there were three-fifths of a human being, even in the Constitution. So, like, it comes from the same kind of period where even in the great American Constitution, we're considered three-fifths of a human being, and in the Bible, we're the sons of Cain. Okay, so then you get all kinds of justifications for all kinds of things. So it's very much very
yeah,
similar to the treatment of women. And so,
yes,
but then, a lot of African Americans are heavily Christian, right? But they still believed that God was good. They still felt
yes.
that and it's a big part of the whole civil rights era, was run by a lot of preachers.
Oh,
So,
no
so it's
joke.
a whole idea is that there can be this goodness that you just have to show people that maybe they're interpreting this other side is
Mhm.
interpreting things wrong. And that's what, you just have to challenge it. And it doesn't mean you're not a Christian because look at all these Christian, people that were fighting for abolition. Like that was because they felt there was something wrong, right? But other people had for
Totally.
years and hundreds of years said, "Oh, it was right." You just have to challenge it.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. That's you've reminded me of one of my favorite quotes is from C.S. Lewis, and I mean lifetime favorite. He says, "Religion without God is one of the meanest forces on the face of the earth." So,
Yeah, it can
to
be
me that like
very political.
yeah, it can be used, when it doesn't understand the heart of God, it can be used to oppress all kinds of different people and seemingly justify something, but, yeah, so I just thought that was a brilliant comment, from Lewis. I So, in
Well, a lot of
terms of
people, yeah, you do have
yeah,
to, yeah. I mean, well, I guess what I was trying to say is like people have these paradigms that we're
mhm,
either kind of born into the paradigm or taught the paradigm, and then you have to find out, is that really making sense to you? Is it doing harm to you? Do you feel good? If you don't feel good, that you feel like, oh, like maybe I shouldn't be here, or
right,
maybe I'm not worthy, then you can start to question, like, is that paradigm that put me in this spot, is that really the right thing? you know,
yeah,
to
absolutely,
there's nothing wrong with questioning that once you realize like that's how you feel every day, then something doesn't fit. Like again, that
mhm,
cognitive dissonance is like, why is that?
mhm, yeah. Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I relied on a lot in terms of my recovery and my career recovery. When there's a cognitive dissonance, one of the things Bissell van der Kolk wrote about was parts therapy, where people literally dialogue with, like, and parts. The idea of parts is widespread. Most people, it would not be a weird thing at all for somebody who said, part of me wants to go to dinner with you guys, but part of me wants to stay home tonight in my pajamas because I just want to be in my PJs on the couch. You know? So there's 2 parts, and they
Mhm.
want different things. And, without getting into it too far, parts therapy, identifies the parts of us that, like, for example, I was a non-producing artist, I was a shadow artist, right? And what I
Mhm.
discovered was there were parts who were designed to stay safe, and of course, you don't make art by staying safe, you
Yeah,
have to
safe.
take risks, right? You
Yeah,
gotta create, you gotta say something, and you gotta ship it, right?
you gotta
All
show
of
it.
those yeah, all of those are, um, eh, bigger and bigger levels of exposure, of self-exposure, and so, I had to take some of those parts down in addition to just your basic stuff that was part of my standard recovery, like self-acceptance, a healthy and appropriate kind of self-love. I don't mean loving myself more than everybody else. I just mean thinking I had
Mhm.
value and something to contribute, right? I needed to come to that
Yeah.
realization, and then the other realization, and this goes back to identity, was I'm an artist. Yeah, I had been so talked out of it. It's like every time I said, you know, "What do you," they said, "What do you wanna do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a singer, and I already write songs. I've been writing songs since I'm 6." And they're like, "Yeah, but you need a backup plan," or, "Yeah, but what are you gonna do for money?" And so this messaging as, "Well, you can want that, but you can't do that," right? You can't make that work.
Mhm.
That had a certain amount of parts, and so, what I ended up doing was something called identity work, and, it turns out that when
Mhm.
we have habits, habits inform identity, and identity informs habits. Right? So you're a music producer, right? So at what point did you say I'm a music producer? Was it before you ever did any music production, or was it after you had done some and then you started to say, "Huh, I'm a music producer," right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kinda
The
like chicken and egg, 'cause I
Yes.
was always like, I was into, like, singer-songwriting, right? So,
Okay.
the idea was I didn't do covers. Even,
Okay.
like, I stay at age 17, I went and got a multi-track, I went and got stuff, and I wasn't just covering the bands, like, every band I was trying to be in at, say, age 17 just wanted to cover Led Zepp, just wanted
Yeah.
to cover whatever was in the top 10,
Sure.
and I was like, "No, the band I'm putting together, we're gonna do original music," and I was
Mhm.
writing a lot of it. And I would go find
Right.
singers and I was writing the parts. And so I knew right from the start that I was more, and I grew up liking the Beatles and I knew about who George Martin was. I knew he was the producer,
Right.
right? So I
Right.
knew famous
Right.
producers. I had read about famous producers. And so I kind of, as a fan, had been looking at how music was set up and I knew about engineers, I knew about producers. I knew about, the guys who wrote their own songs and the guys that just sang other people's songs. And I said, I want
Mhm.
to be more like a Dylan. I'm way more like a
Right.
Hendrix. I wanna write my own thing. I don't wanna just sing somebody else's work. So that yeah, right from the start, I knew what I wanted, and that's not always the case. A lot of people I would get run into music, they wanna they're singers and they don't write their own stuff, or they're
Mhm.
players, like bass players, and they don't write their own bass line. They're waiting for me to give them the bass line.
Mhm.
And so, like, I always kinda like the guys who can write their own stuff because to me, it's like it's more interesting when I find somebody has their own vision.
Yeah, it's funny because I grew up in a house of classical musicians. I was surrounded by classical music all the time, and I played, violin, and then I played viola. I was in orchestras for years, and I was once again, I was the bad child, right? Because,
Mhm.
when I went into practice, I did my scales and I did this stuff to be ready for my next lesson, but I just got through that as quick as I can so I could compose. And in other words, the whole classical music
Mhm.
world also is all about replication, replication, replication. And I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh my
All
heavens, I mean,
replication.
that stuff is beautiful, I appreciate it, but what don't we get to create?"
But you can
And,
learn. Yeah, I started that way so you can learn. You can learn, but then when I learned, then I wanna take to the next step, and then I don't wanna keep on playing Beethoven, playing Bach, playing Chopin. I mean, I started that on a clarinet, and I was in concert
uh-huh,
bands, and I was
Okay,
playing
right.
all this stuff that was written. And then I said, "Well, that's nice," and I learned how to sheet read. But like, but I don't wanna play that all the time. I wanna do something else. And a lot some people just like the idea of having that structure, because some people are very structure oriented, right? So they don't know how to write their own thing. I've run into classical musicians. You try to put them in a jazz group, they don't know what to vibe on. They can't improvise because they're kind of
No, they don't even yeah, I'm not e
so
they're not even aware of it.
into giving the sheet. They don't know what to do if you put them in. Yeah, you can't work with them because they don't know how to do it. They're looking for, like, "Give me the chart." It's like, we're not gonna give you the chart, you just gotta feel it." And they're like, "Oh."
Yeah,
They can't feel
I
it.
know. Yeah, like, you're kidding me. You're not gonna give me, a score? Like, I just give me the score, and I'll play off the piece of
No, no.
paper. Yeah, or at least a chord chart, you know? Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
no
So,
chart
it was
chart.
the same.
Just do it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it's the same with obviously, I mean, I do have an appreciation for all that because it is a different skill set and it's a good skill set, but it's not how I was made. And so it took me getting out of my family of origin. I mean, I did write a lot of songs. I actually won awards as a teenager and um you know, did do some stuff as a singer-songwriter, but I had I think I did it because it was my therapy. It's not like it was affirmed
Mhm.
or valued or anything else because it was just like, "What are you doing that for?" You know? So,
Yeah.
um,
It's like
I
most artists, you just do it because you love it, and it is therapy.
yeah, yeah. Well, and the thing about art, I think a lot of us who find true north for us realize that there are certain things that we can't not do. Like, yeah, I
Mhm.
got sick. I got an illness, a disease that affected my lungs, and I had to stop singing. Well, I didn't have to stop singing. It was impossible. I couldn't cross a living room without being winded. So singing was over. But
Mm.
then it took me years to realize that music didn't have to be over, even though singing seemed to be. Now I'm singing again. I've got
Mhm.
new songs coming out. I have a new EP that's coming out in the next 30 or 60 days. But at the time, I thought, yeah, yes, I'm super, super glad to be saying that. But at the time, I thought it's over. And so I put all of music away because I was more like the singer songwriter. I didn't want to sing songs that other people had written necessarily, but I didn't do what you did, and I wish I had. I found out about George Martin a lot later, and people like, who's the really famous LA session the Wrecking Crew. I mean, right? All those
Oh, yeah,
session
right.
guys
Yeah.
that brought these
Yeah, yeah,
licks and certain iconic lines that make a song the thing that the song is, just like George
yeah.
Martin did
Yeah, like
for
the
Eleanor
Funk
Rigby.
Brothers at Motown, like yeah,
Yes!
yeah, like
Y
Funk Brothers at Motown. Yeah, they
ex
they were like the hit crew, and they were just, like,
yes.
putting things through. And you had all these
Yeah,
great, guys like Todd Rundgren, and you had these, like, big producers that were known for having, like, all these studio musicians within the different scenes. You got the Chicago scene, you got the LA scene, you got the New York scene.
right,
You had these
right.
different people coming like Neil Diamond coming out of Tin Pan Alley, and you got these guys doing different things. But the idea that you could the age of the singer-songwriter, I'm a child of the '70s, so I grew
Mhm.
up with Neil Diamond being out there, right? And he decided,
Okay.
"I'm gonna go," and then you get like, you get all those great albums, like James Taylor, you get all these like singer-songwriters that started showing you that the song can be more than just some kind of how much is that doggy in the window or some kind of hit. It
Yes,
can actually
yes.
be very introspective. It
Yeah.
actually can, Joni Mitchell. You get these people that are
One of my
really getting
favorite.
into like they're in the internal conflicts that are inside of an artist, and then have
Yes.
making a voice for a whole generation. You get these people like, James Taylor. Yeah, they give Fire and Rain.
Mhm.
It's like you get these people taking these moments in their life and making it universal. So people say, "Oh, it's okay to feel that way. It's okay
Yeah.
to have that kind of sadness and melancholy and actually express it." and
Yeah.
actually it becomes more than just some commercial thing. It's actually becomes like it's art. And there's a whole thing in the '70s with the music was like art.
Oh,
It
I
happened to
agree.
make money, but it felt like it was very authentic, because it felt real. It felt like these are not just commercial feelings. These are these are not things just to make a hit. These people actually really felt these things, and it happened to become a hit.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. But also, so I was super, super keyed into that, but I wasn't paying attention to all the roles that go into making that song. I was strictly singer-songwriter. Another great example, I'm sure you love it too, is the Swamp Boys from the Muscle
Mm,
Shoals.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it's
muscle
like,
shoals.
yeah, so that sound was the same group of guys on record after record after record who are just cranking out, iconic licks and hooks and making things just so unique and memorable that that's how you take a song and make it a hit, right?
Yeah, yeah, the
So,
hit
I
makers.
had a whole learning curve that I had to go through later. So, in a way, I benefited from losing my lungs, because I started learning about all the other chops, all the other skill sets that go into
Mhm.
song making and songcraft. So that was cool. That was great. I'm glad to be singing again because that is my number one identity. I mean, um, aside from I'm Melanie, the next thing is and I sing.
Mhm.
But, but
Yeah.
identity yeah. You wanted to say something?
Well, I think, yeah, it's interesting because for years, I never sang. I'm a keyboardist. I was like, in a band playing the keyboards. I would write the lyrics, I wouldn't sing them. And then
Uh-huh.
eventually I had cancer and I beat cancer. And I said, you know what? I was always scared of singing. I was scared
Huh.
of doing it, but I was writing songs, but I just wasn't singing them. I was giving them to
Alright.
somebody else. And then I said, you know what? If I'm going to ever be an artist, I got to actually sing my own stuff. So I
Good for
started,
you.
in 2016, I rebranded my stuff as Phantom and I started singing my own stuff. And then it kind of, now I'm out here with my podcast and stuff. But it was this thing when once I actually started to, have a voice, I got a certain fan base. And I have a fan base that I've been able to be out there. I'm not super big, but I started to feel better because I actually like, yeah, this is my vision and
Right.
and being able to actually, get to the point where you felt confident enough to do
Yes.
that, it's
Yes.
hard, as a musician, like, you don't always get to that point. Everybody gets to that point in a different time frame when they're ready to, but, yeah, I understand it.
Yeah, and what you're describing to me is like in the book, like late in the book, I realized that I was coming into what I call inner alignment. Like finally my desire and my goals and my activities, like my habits, my habit life, they were all finally lining up and they were working toward being not just a producing artist, but a career artist. And it
Mhm,
took it wasn't that I didn't have the interest or the desire. I had that for decades before I was a producing artist. What I didn't have was the internal alignment. And so that's why I focus a lot
mhm,
on parts work because it was largely prayer. I mean, the same kind of thing is talked about in the Bible. I know it's a completely different language because they don't talk about family therapy, but there's a scripture, there's quite a few actually that says, God wants truth in our inmost being or in our innermost parts, some translations say. And now that I feel alignment within, I'm good to go. All right. I mean, I just I found out
mhm,
I really like production music. I just did a 288-minute underscore. So in addition to my singer-songwriter stuff, which I'm just about to roll out after, a 40-year chill. Um, I really
mhm,
love writing to picture. I and so, um, all those things are happening for me now because of the alignment within, and without it, I think I would have died. I don't remember who coined this phrase, but I would have died with my songs unsung.
Yeah, it's like a holistic thing. A lot of times, it's like when I started to kind of get the picture that like I gotta sing my own work to actually
Mhm.
make it really be me. And I still like to do work where I'll do like video game soundtracks or ads or stuff that don't
Right,
have vocals. Got a
right,
synthesis, so I can just do stuff that's like, very cinematic. But
right.
my real love is actually writing my own songs, and they're very experimental, kind of funk, new wave. They're kind of progressive rock, and that's
Okay.
not exactly what's going on today. But the way the world is, when you put stuff out there, you get markets. So even if
Yes.
a 7-minute song isn't what happens in the top 10, and if it sounds more like a Genesis song or a Yes song or, something that's from the '70s, there's still people that will like that. And so, like,
Yeah,
you don't have to
absolutely.
just do what's in the top 10, and you can just be who you are, and you can be a working artist in this as long as you don't overextend yourself. So, but people is
Yes.
like, you don't have to like, and not everybody's going to be in the top 20, right? Or top 10, but you can still be a functional musician if you find ways to do sync licensing and you
Exactly.
just put the work out. You'd be surprised how many places you can actually play and play live. I played in New York and Boston. It's like you can actually get out there with
Right,
not being as big as you might think you have to be. And
right,
that's where the
right.
confidence kind of comes in, where you have to, it's not be a shadow artist anymore. You got to actually be willing to put it out.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I love what you're saying about coming into your voice because that is no matter what the art form is, that's what we all have to do. And, and once you've come into your voice, um, it's I mean, I enjoy a lot of things, but I'm totally there with you. My in my heart of hearts, I'm a singer-songwriter. And, I just love that
Mhm.
composing is close enough to really be kind of the same juice. Yeah, or at
Yeah.
least very
Yeah.
similar. It gives me a lot of joy.
Well, I mean, I get so into it, I got a bedroom studio for real. Like behind me are my Moogs and my Rolands and my Yamahas and all my multi tracks because I'm so into it that
Yeah,
I just write all the time. And I'm kind of like, I just write whether or not anybody's gonna like it. I don't care. I write all the time. And kind of
yeah,
like, I kind of got this thing where why not? And the way the world is today, you can produce a lot of material and actually have a lot of places to put it. And and
yes,
then so the gatekeepers that used to exist aren't there,
they're
right? So
gone.
it doesn't stop you from putting it on all these places and then getting opportunities. I get opportunities. So, oh, a therapist wants me to write art therapy music for 'em, or they want me to
Mhm,
do like ocean wave sound thing for a sound therapy, or I get an opportunity to work on a video game, or I work on, I get to work in all kinds of things. I get others that want to collaborate, and it just comes out of just showing up. Like it's like my father used to say, you got to show up. If you show up, you'd be surprised what happens. But if you like just think about it, well, that's not showing up. You got to show up.
Yeah, yeah, it is a great time. It is a great time for musicians. I know. I mean, I'm talking to some sync libraries and a couple of sync agents now, and I don't have any sync placements, but that is definitely one of my goals. One of my next goals. So you're absolutely right. I mean, if you even if with an audience of like, a couple of thousand people, um, well, I think if you have 2 or 3,000 people there, you just haven't gotten out far enough yet. There's probably more. If you've got 2 or 3,000, there's more.
Mm,
But even with a small audience, and a small
yeah,
following, you can make a living, and that is what's so cool about being a musician today, or a
yeah.
composer,
And it's
whichever.
just a lot of it is just yeah, you just have to have the belief. I think it's that thing of people wonder, like, how can somebody get on stage? Well,
Uh-huh.
when you're an artist, you have to figure out how to get over that, right? That stage fright from the first time you're like a musician that made that decision that you're going to show up on that stage and you don't care what anybody's going to say, you're just going to do it. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a certain point to get there. It's kind of like a point where you have to decide, are you going to go to therapy? or are you going to write that book, or are you going to
Right.
start being a photographer, or you like, or you don't care what anybody thinks, you're going to start doing it. But you have to
Right.
get to that point where you feel good enough about yourself that
Yep.
you're not always saying, well, what if, what if, what if? No, just do it. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
just at some point you can't keep on saying, all the like, well, maybe I'm not good enough. Like, you don't know until you put it out there, and so you will get people like in the net age, they will just say they don't like it. Well, that doesn't mean you hang it up just because they don't
Yeah.
like it, because there's
Yeah.
always somebody who doesn't like something.
Oh, sure. Yeah, they're just not your audience, that's all. You you could maybe even, get along great in some other context, they're just not your audience. It's funny, what's happened to me in my art making is that I I'm not saying it's not therapeutic anymore, it is still therapeutic, but it used to be, uh, totally therapeutic, and that was the reason I did it, whereas now, when I make art, I'm thinking a lot more about who I'm making it for than I am about, and I
Mhm.
don't mean that in a, some capitalistic, I gotta,
Well,
write
you
this
gotta know your
formalistic
audience.
thing. Yeah, yeah, no, I mean something more like, it's an act of service now. In other words, I'm still telling the truth, I'm still being personal and working toward being universal, but it's like, okay, I'm an artist, and that's really what I'm here to do and be and do. And so I'm
Mhm.
gonna it's kinda like a baker serves bread. It's like,
Yeah,
here's
yeah.
here's what I got, I got this loaf and I got that loaf, and, you can take it or leave it, it's fine. But what I'm here to do is serve my bread, you know? And, that's been
But I
a
think,
very cool
you start
shift.
getting into that groove.
Yeah.
Well, I think you get like, when you're an artist, like, I remember I was 17, I was writing my first songs, and it's like, "Okay, are we really gonna play these in front of anybody?" And at a certain point, you start getting into the flow. You get into the groove, and the rest of the band start nodding their head, and then the hanger-ons nod their head, and then you start getting buzzed, and people in the school start saying, "Yeah, that sounds good." Like, so you start getting, like, the permission from the
Yep.
audience. It's like, yeah, what you're doing is hitting, that you're
Yeah.
because there is this kinda connection when you're a musician with the audience, where you can have
Totally.
compared to other artists, like writers, you get immediate feedback from your audience when you're a live musician. You get to immediately know if what you're doing is working or it's not working.
Yeah, it's in the room.
And
It's
that's,
right there.
yeah, right there, and that's kinda cool, you know?
Yeah, it is. It is. I do love that. But I have to say that I'm trying to say that something positive shifted, that when I was just doing art for my own recovery's sake, um, I mean, I had the same skills, and I had definitely come into my own voice, quite a long time ago as a musician, I mean. Um, but, uh but I was inward focused, I guess, might be a good way to put it, and now it's more outward. It's like, "Hey, let's share,
Mhm.
let's have fun, let's grow, um, let's benefit from one another." And so it's just it's I like what's happened since I did my own recovery, because it's now it's for sharing, if that makes
Yeah,
any
I think that's
sense,
the
I
whole
don't.
thing, like, when it becomes, yeah, it does. It's like, because a lot of music, I have songs that are therapeutic, and they're kinda like, "Okay, this song is this for me, and it's a demo, and I don't know if I'm ever gonna really present it." It might have actually triggered me to write another song that then I
Right.
present that one.
Yes.
And then the idea is like, and then you get, yeah, and so then you get to this point where it's like, okay, I know which ones are for me, and I know which ones are actually for the world, and I learned how to, figure out that it's like a process. It's like sometimes, like as a musician, like I go through all these demos and all these things that kind of lead me, and it's not a failure. People say, "Oh, you all these failed songs." They're not failures. Like, if
Right.
you had 99 songs and on the 100th song, that's one that you actually present, that's a process that got you to that point. I don't look at it as a
Exactly.
failure. It's like those aren't failures. Those are steps
Steps.
in on the ladder that got me to there, to that
Right.
point.
Absolutely. And you mentioned another point when, in terms of like the growth stages of an artist. One is like appreciating the art, right? We've already talked about that. We're appreciating who you are, protecting who you are as an artist. I think most artists are more sensitive than the average bear. And so that means we have to understand what to protect ourselves from. That almost universally is a lot of negativity, and we have to learn how to deal with rejection, but it's the negativity, that we have to protect ourselves from.
Yeah,
At
yeah,
least we can't
yeah,
make room for it in our own head. We can't have it there, not too much anyway. But then beyond that, it's like, okay, I am an artist. I'm looking out for the artist that's in me. I value the work. I see other people valuing the work. And now it's like, how do I understand my artistic process better, right? So that I can just be more prolific and do better work because we're always trying to up level.
yeah, yeah, yeah. What I find is I get a lot of people to help me to like listen. Well, I'll
Uh-huh.
find places to like, like authors will have beta groups to like
Yep,
beta readers. I've
totally.
talked to a lot of authors. And it's like you send it to the beta reader. You have your editor. You have these groups that you'll try things on. Musicians are the same thing.
Stages.
You have trusted musicians that you work with for 20 years, right? It's like I'm going to send you this. It's like, is this really it or not? And then
Yeah.
what happens a lot of times is the song I thought was it. They're saying this other
It's
song is
not
it. And I'm like, "Oh, really?"
okay.
It's like and sometimes it's like I said, "Okay," I let the world kinda tell me because you never know. Because so a lot of times artists, like, I pick the song I like is not the song the
Uh-huh.
fans like. And I'm like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
that
that's
yes.
interesting." 'Cause
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's fun when somebody else says, "No, this is the
So
one
you
that's
have to be
cooking."
willing to kinda
Yeah.
let it go. Yeah, well, you have
Yeah.
to let it go because a lot of times, like, you want your ego is like, "Well, I really want this one to go through," and we have to, like, let some things go in
Yes.
order to progress, and sometimes you let go the thing that you thought was it. And somebody
Mhm.
else, these other people have told you, "No, that this one's the
Mm.
one that's it." And you're like, "Oh." And
Yeah.
when I was younger, I was like, "Oh," I used to get upset. And then now as I older, I'm like, "Okay." I kinda live with it. It's like, "Okay, that's the way that way it works." And I accept it, but it's hard.
I think one of the coolest things to be a more mature artist, one of the coolest things is, and I mean mature, I guess I mean in terms of artistry and just plain an older human being. I mean both. Is that I realize now that we do our best, but we create a lot of times with if you're composing and producing with gear. I mean that's pretty solitary. So now what's happened is my community of fellow artists is priceless to me for that very reason you're talking about because they're the ones that are like, okay, maybe this one didn't come easy and but this is the one that's happening. This is the
Mhm.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Or just, hey, that's almost there. But I thought you might have gone this other direction with it. And you go, huh, yeah, good idea.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So it's the community around me that helps me stay well, that helps me keep growing. Absolutely. I
Yeah,
trust
that's how
them.
you
I
grow.
trust
'Cause yeah, I mean, we're probably gonna we actually hit, like, the hour mark, but I, like, finish
Oh,
at the point of, like, you w will because what happens, with artists is, like, you get these ideas, and you're kinda, like, totally wedded to the idea, and then
oh, yeah.
sometimes, like, producers or other bandmates or other people around you, other artists, even, like, a fan, a hardcore fan that's, like, a listener in a listener group, and they go,
Yeah.
like, "Yeah." Peg, this is the one. This, and they actually been right a lot. And you're like, oh, they go, wow, okay. Because you never know. Because then you get the maturity is to not, it's to kind of be willing to listen. And sometimes I do hold on to one thing and say, this one's still
Yep.
going to be in the record because this
Yep.
is part of the concept, but that might not be
Yeah.
the single. So you would start to make compromises, you make changes, and sometimes you hold on to something because like, yeah, that's core to what I'm trying to do. And other ones
e
say, okay, I can let that one go. But yeah, I think it's just
Absolutely.
kind of how you mature as a person, what you're willing to hear feedback. And I think at the lesson is like you kind of need to have listening skills in the world if you ever want to get past a certain point. Because
Yeah.
if you don't listen to other people, how are you ever going to progress?
How you gonna grow? Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. That's absolutely right. Uh, this has been a very fun conversation.
Well, thank you. Yeah, like I said, you'll have you come back when your album is ready or the songs are ready. But let people
Yeah.
to go to resurrectedroadkill.com to check out your work there. That will
Yeah.
be clickable when we're fully published. We're going to be published on almost every platform you can watch or hear a podcast. We're on all the major platforms. Like I said, we're going to give your audience a landing page and they can listen or watch however they want. Right
Okay.
now, we were on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and we're going to have more more channels to be on by tomorrow. We just got to migrate that through. But thank you again for being on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. We appreciate every guest that comes on that has their point of view, and it's really cool to talk to people like yourself. Musicians are where I started, and
Yeah.
creative people who are primarily who I talk to. And but
Mhm.
we've opened it up to many other types of people, and it's just always fun to talk to people in that kind of space. So thank you for
Yeah.
being on the show tonight.
Oh, heavens, thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking with you and meeting you.
Thank you. Well, have a good night.
Thanks. You too.